just which
yeah, ping the challenge. I mean, people signed up, so
let's see. All right, so welcome to globetrotter number 11, if that's correct, and I'm sure it is, because Sally is keeping close count for us here. And I'm going to go to get this thing up and running. And where we left off at a really fun place where we're about to try and figure out how to add edit functionality to our trips. We've made it so we can create trips, and we were talking about what are we going to do, how are we going to make this edit thing work, and we're going to run into some interesting problems. And the vote, I think, was to use the same form component for both, and I like that idea, some code reuse, but it comes with some drawbacks or some issues, or at least some, I'll say, some opportunities for solving problems. How's that?
So first, Howard, is there an equivalence in React that's similar to Rails where you use a partial for the forms, or you're just kind of building something, or there is no true analogous thing?
So if we're going to make that comparison, and I think we can, if you think about a view template in Rails, an ERB file, it's just that, it's a template. It's a template that's expecting certain arguments to be coming in, usually in the form of instance variables. Sometimes we can pass local variables if we're using a partial or something like that. So it could be any number of variables that are being expected to be passed in. And what's returned from a partial, or I should say from any ERB file, is HTML. And guess what? A React component, even though it's not Ruby, and even though it's not like HTML per se, it's JavaScript and it's JSX, and it's still HTML looking, and it still expects certain variables to be provided to it, and it still returns HTML. So I think you can make that comparison, and I would say an ERB file and a React component both end up having the job of returning some amount of HTML given certain inputs. So I would say that they're very similar. In terms of, like, if we break it down into a partial versus some other ERB file that's just sort of a quote-unquote standard view, maybe, I don't know, you might say, well, a container component versus that renders other components, right? Where like an ERB file might then turn around and render other partials based on information, right? There might be some logic involved. So you could make that comparison as well. Maybe a presentational component is kind of like a partial, right? And a container component is more like the whole ERB file that may or may not render other partials. So I think that comparison is totally valid, actually. That's my opinion.
So is there a best practices on how to do edit?
Yeah, I mean, best practices, there's a lot of opinions when it comes to best practices, I'll say that, and that's okay. If it's clean and it works, it probably belongs in best practices. If it's terrible amounts of data waste and code reuse and code bloat, and it looks terrible and sloppy and hard to read, maybe it's not a best practice. That's kind of my barometer. How horrible is it to read? How easy is it to understand? So that was a great way to dodge your question a little bit. But like, what is the best practice? You know, I think really keeping it clean really is a good practice. And what does that mean? Like, thinking in React, doing the things that React expects you to do. That just comes with practicing and reading the docs and seeing what other people are doing and what they're doing well and poorly, and kind of like trying to get a feel for it. I don't have a great metric to give you to say, here's how you can tell if you're doing it right or if you're doing it wrong. So it just comes with more and more practice and how clean it feels. How clean it feels, I think, is a great tool, or a great way to measure. My opinion again. I don't know if that's really helpful to you or not, but okay. So let's figure out kind of where we were here. I think we had built our edit. I think this is where we left off, right? We had built our edit route. So yeah. I could go to like my trips, I could see a trip, I could get to this form. Right now we're just rendering the new form. And of course, we know we want, when we go to edit something, we want that form to be populated with the appropriate information. And right now it's not, so that's a problem. So let's try and figure this out. And this is kind of where Sally just asked the question. We were talking about, like, what is it should we just add a totally new edit trip form component? And that would be probably like the easiest thing to do, right? We're just going to duplicate our new form. We're going to change the things that make it an edit form. We're going to have two components that are forms. One's an edit form, one's a delete form. Or one's an edit form, one's a create form. I don't like that. Let's see if we can reuse this form. And I think before we get into it, we're gonna have to make a few sweeping changes. Like we should rename this thing just trip form. So let's do that. I'm gonna rename this trip form. And this is gonna be kind of like just the slimmed down form version of that thing. And then I'm gonna do something really dangerous, and I'm gonna run a find and replace on trip form. New trip form. And find all. And replace them all with, we need to do we are case sensitive, that's good. So this is going to be just trip form. Let's replace all of this is dangerous. Ooh, let's see, anything that we don't want to change? I'm gonna try it. Okay. My actions I need to rename. Oops. New trip form should just be trip form. Okay. Let's see if we have new trip form anywhere. That should just be replaced with lowercase trip form. Okay. And there's no way we're not going to break something with all these changes. Let's just see. Anything in the reducers? Yes. Rename this to trip form. And that should have already been replaced, right? All of our new trip form stuff. Oh, there's no reference there. And our store should have already been replaced. Trip form, okay. Let's see what we broke. So what I want to do now is just kind of close everything, take a step back, go to the browser, try and create something. Let's see if we actually didn't break anything, which would be amazing. So we're logged in. Nadia's got all the action here. We're logged in as Nadia still. Let's go to Canada 2020. And we're going to leave on January 1st of 2020. Come back January 1st of 2021. You're kidding me, that worked? I must have broken something. Did I not break anything? Wow. Okay, I think we're okay. Somehow, unless I made a change somewhere else that I didn't notice, I think we're okay. So now let's think about when I click on trips and I want to edit, you know what, who wants to be in Canada that long? So let's figure out how I can edit this trip. I want this form to be populated. That's where we are right now. Currently, I'm rendering the new trip form. So let's look at the new trip form. I should say the trip form now, which was the new trip form, and compare that against like, what are we setting this thing up for and how does it need to change? So the question at hand is how is the new trip form going to be different from the edit trip form in terms of the props that it gets and what it needs to do and how it needs to work? This might be easier to read if I do it. Can everybody read this okay? Or I could stack these.
It looks good.
Okay. Just open that up a little so you can see the difference. Handle change isn't going to really be any different. Handle submit's definitely going to be different, or at least like either we need two or something's going on there. Nothing really is different about the form itself except for the value needs to already be populated, right? So currently these are controlled inputs, right? So we're grabbing the values from Redux and we're inputting them. We're showing them immediately. What I'm grabbing from props is just the form data and the user ID. And since we're using Redux for the form data, we have some interesting sort of things that we need to solve here. So when we go to trips new, right now the trip form itself is taking care of itself. It's grabbing, it knows what it needs to grab from in terms of functionality, which is the update trip form and create trip. So it's taking care of that kind of on its own, and it's grabbing the form data from Redux and the user ID from Redux, and like it's good to go, right? The trip form doesn't need any any sort of inputs or anything from us currently because it was set up to be a new trip form. The edit trip form, what does the edit trip form need for sure? Like for starters?
The values from the existing form.
Yeah, it needs those trip values. What's the problem with that though? Like if suppose that I pass in a trip, right? Because I can find the trip, here it is, and I can pass this trip along. In fact, I think I already did this. This is kind of where we left off. And if I look at trip here, if I grab that in as a prop, and I go to my trips and I try to edit one of these. Let's go to Canada, edit this trip. And I go to my React Dev Tools to see the props that I'm getting. And I inspect this thing via React. And I looked at my trip form. I can see there's my trip. It's got its attributes. It's everything I need to load this form. What's the problem? Does anyone see a problem? Anyone? Any thoughts? Questions? Like,
well, is it because what you're saying is not the information in the database?
This is the information in the database.
The database information.
Yeah. This is correct. Okay. This is exactly what I wanted to. I don't know where locations came from. Locations I probably want to dump. I'm not sure why that's in there, but oh no, that's correct actually. Those are locations that we serialized. That's right. So this is all good, right? This is good stuff. So how do I get these things into these inputs? Okay, so I have a trip object that has everything it needs. What do we think?
Don't you need the props?
Well, I've got my trip in here as props. That's what we were just looking at, right? These are the props of the trip form, and I've got my trip. I have it, right?
So do you pass them in from your root for the edit?
Yeah, and I did, right? I passed into the trip form right now. So I'm in my edit route. So that's how I did this. I grabbed, once I matched my edit route, I grabbed my trip. This is where we left off last time. I found the trip I needed. And I can see that trip, and I'm passing along as a prop to my form. And that seems like good news, because that means that the trip has all the information I need to populate this form initially. But what's the problem? Where are we getting our values from?
Yeah, does it have to do with like how we control the form and
yes,
using the same form for,
yes,
like in one way it's supposed to start empty, but then in our other use it needs to be populated?
Yes, that's exactly the problem at hand. And we like that these are controlled, right? I could delete these values, right? Or I could just say like an if statement, if there's a trip, then I'm going to provide the values of the trip and be done with it. But I want these to be controlled, right? And plus we're using Redux, they need to be controlled. Whoops. I need that. I need this value to come from this name, this start date, and these end dates. They're not coming from like the trip. They're not coming locally. They're coming from Redux. I'm grabbing the form data from Redux. I'm letting Redux control this. And that's what I want. So how can if Redux is holding on to the form data, right? And if I look at Redux, it is, right? If I look at my Redux store, if I look at my state, I have my trip form here, right? And if I start typing in it, it changes. That's what I want to happen. When I load edit, when this page loads, I want this thing to show up already. So basically, the point I'm making is I need to tell Redux what I want the form data to be. So what I could do is something like create a new, so let's try this. What if I create an action? So I'm going to go into my actions and my trip form actions. And I'm going to say, this one updates only a little piece at a time, right? So I need one that just like updates the whole form. So how about like set form data for edit? I don't know if that's, does that sound, is everyone okay with that? I'm going to get a trip as an argument, and I'm going to return basically a whole new object. If I look at my initial state from my reducer, which is trip form, I'll split this guy down. Whoops. I'll split this guy down, and we'll look, here's my initial state, right? So basically, just for reference, what I want to return is a type of set form data for edit, right? Something like that. Basically, I'm populating the entire form. And the trip is what I need to pass along. Or at least like const trip form data. If I just make sure to set this up very, very carefully, I could say something like name, oops, this is going to be trip.attributes.name and create, what is it? Start date, trips.attributes.start date, and end date, trips.attributes.end date. Does everyone see what I'm doing here? I want to pass along exactly the information I want this form to have. And I'm going to pass it along as an object. I'm essentially like providing a brand new chunk of data here. And I'm going to say this is now my trip form data. And when I pass that along, I'm going to catch this now in my reducer. When I copy that, I think well, whatever, this is fine. Case this thing, well, no. And I'm going to return action dot trip form data. If I did that right, I should be able then to fire off this particular action creator, dispatch this action creator, as long as I have a trip object coming from my state, pick the pieces exactly of that trip that I need that the form data is looking for, and update it all at once. Okay. Does any questions about what I'm trying to do here? Why I'm taking this step here?
Well, you're being explicit with the data you need to populate the fields.
Yeah, and since I gave Redux control of my form, it's Redux that I need to tell, right? In other words, in my form, I'm not going to change these references, these value references. They're still going to come from Redux. Okay, so let's even see if this works. And so, like, one way to see if this would work, for example, would be, let's see. What I basically when I would want that to happen would be here, right? And let's see here's a problem we're going to see. So if I say, what did I call that thing? I called it something crazy, set form data for edit. Okay. So I'm going to import that into app. I'm going to say, grab me this action creator from, I'm in app, so app needs to go to, is app on the same level as my, yes. So in the same folder, look for actions and look for trip form. Okay. And then I need to map dispatch to props for that. And basically when I want that to happen is here. And doesn't that almost seem like why wouldn't that work? Okay, let me see. So it's going to be, I can grab that here from props now because I've just connected it to Redux. And so why not just do this? We're going to see a very interesting error here. Does anyone know the error we're going to see here, by the way? Can anyone look at this code right here? And I'm going to highlight what I want you to look at. From here to there. Can anyone spot the problem? There's an anti-pattern going on here, an anti-pattern. From the viewpoint of React. In React, reducers should be pure functions. Sorry, in Redux, reducers should be pure functions, and in React, render should be a pure function. And this is a side effect. So, we see a different problem here. Okay. So I guess this would have to be like if there's a trip, and do that. Does that work? Cool. Wait, did that work? Get out of here. That didn't work. My trips, Canada 2020, edit this trip. That's interesting. I got a new trip. I was expecting an error there. I was expecting it to say that this was not allowed. Okay, well, I was expecting this to say you're not allowed to go changing state like this in the middle of a render. And we shouldn't really. And I wonder why we didn't get our...
Well, it's also not getting your end date.
That's interesting. It's not getting end date. Let's see if we can spot that. And data. Well, that would be why. Okay. So my trips, Canada 2020, edit this trip. It allowed that. What? So this is the warning that I was expecting to see, actually. Cannot update during an existing state transition, such as within render. Render methods should be pure functions of props and state. And this is only a warning, which is why it's still working. But that's not one that's not a rule I want to break. I care a little less about the keys. I should provide key properties. These are all links, which is why it's kind of like a pain because I put them inside of fragments. So like to solve that warning, it's pretty simple actually. I could just, in my a little side note, if I go to my trips, where I'm mapping here, I'm using a React fragment. I could make each of these like, I don't know, a p tag or something, which means I don't need the break anymore. And I could provide the p tag with a key of, I don't know, t.id. And that should take away that, whoa. What did I break there? Okay, let's do this one thing at a time. Get rid of the break. Make this a p. Make this a p, closing p, there we go. I think that might have been my problem. Give this a key of t.id. I don't need a key here anymore. Okay, and then we don't see that error, but we still see this one. And I don't want this one in the console. This is a rule that I really don't want to break. So it is allowing it, but it's not liking it. And so I don't think we should let this warning. Some warnings like I kind of ignore. I would go back by the way and make sure to get rid of all my unused variables, but this is one I don't want to see. So even though it seems to be working, does everyone understand like what we did and why I tried to make this happen this way and why now we suddenly are seeing apparently a form that's appropriately updated? Does everybody feel okay with all this? Any questions? You doing okay?
I think okay, yeah.
Okay. But I don't like this warning. So we're gonna do something different. And there's a couple things we could do. We could try and get in the trip form and add a whole bunch of logic, basically ternaries and if statements. I could do something like edit mode, right? This will add, does anyone know what will happen if I do that and I don't add anything else? Let's just look. If I save that, and this is going to re-render because I just saved it. And in React, I'm going to check and see the props. And notice that I now have a prop called edit mode because I just added it. And if I just pass a prop, oops, on the trip form, if I just pass a prop like that without giving it an assignment explicitly, it expects this to be a Boolean. And that's actually, if you remember HTML, that's the same way it works in HTML, right? I can just do this. I can just add a prop like this or an attribute, and it's going to be like this is true, right? And I could be explicit. I could say equals true if I want to, but I could also just say edit mode, right? So I could use this thing now as a ternary. I could add a ton of logic, and I could make this form really, really ugly, right? I could basically add a ton of stuff to this form. So like if edit mode is true, then I'm going to have to like use one handle submit versus another handle submit, right? One for edit, one for create, and things are going to get a little bit ugly. I'd like to take a different approach. Before I suggest my approach, does anyone have any suggestions or anything they'd like to see, or like maybe we take this a different direction from what I was planning? Any thoughts?
Seems okay.
Okay. So what I think would be nice, and just here, if we leave the trip form itself sort of intact, and we have one trip form, but what if I had two different wrappers for that trip form? And so basically like a container that's either one for new and one for edit. And those things those containers then become responsible for doing the things to initialize and set up the form that it needs and passing it the information it needs. And the form itself just knows how to be a form and fire a handle submit. Okay.
That sounds good.
So we're basically going to create containers, which we could call wrappers or we could call containers. And I want to create two of them, one for edit and one for create. So I'm going to add, and right now everything is in components. I should split these up a little bit more, but right now everything's just getting tossed into components. So I'm going to create a new file called edit form. I could call it container. I could call it wrapper. I'm just going to call it wrapper. I think I like that. Edit form wrapper and a new file called new form wrapper. I should call it new trip form wrapper. Okay. And rename this to edit trip form wrapper. Rename edit trip form wrapper. Okay. And so now what's going to happen is these are going to be responsible then for rendering their own. Each one of these is going to render trip form. But then what's going to happen is I'm going to pull apart the things that an edit form needs versus the things that a trip form needs and perform operations within this thing that need to happen. And let's see what that looks like. So I want my trip form over here on the right. And we're kind of going to look at create these wrappers kind of one at a time. Let's create, which one do we, let's create the new trip form wrapper first, because not a ton of stuff's going to change here. Whoops. Whoops. Nope. Where's my trip form? There it is. Sorry, wrong one. So let's see. My let's see. I know I need to import React. I think this can be a functional component. Let's find out. Or React stateless component. Okay, let's see. This is going to be new trip form wrapper. And let's see. New trip form wrapper is now going to need create trip. Okay. It's going to need connect. Well, I think so. Yes, definitely, because I need this thing. It doesn't need update trip form. I think update trip form can just live inside the form here. And what I need to pass down is a prop. I know I'm gonna render nothing but, I think, the trip form. Oops. Okay. And what props does it need? It needs form data. And I don't think I need to pass form data down because I'm already connected to it, and that's still going to be the same, right? History, I'm okay with still connecting to here. I should make sure to pass that down actually. So I'm going to say, I know I need history, and that's going to be props.history, or I'm going to destructure it to just history. So that's going to still be passed down. Update trip form, that can stay here. Create trip, I'm going to get out of here, which means I can pull it out of the form as well. My user ID, I'm okay with still grabbing here, and my trip, no, this is the form. Yeah, trip is fine to live there, even though the new form doesn't need it. This is going to stay the same. A handle change isn't going to change. And I've already built this I've already basically built this function, this handle submit for creation. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull that thing up, and I'm going to say const handle submit. I'm basically going to build this. I can just pull it out. I'm going to take this thing, and I'm going to put it here. I'm going to pass it down as a prop directly from my new trip form wrapper. And so I'm going to say handle submit equals handle submit. Okay, and this is now going to be a prop. And I'm going to get rid of it from the form. Handle submit takes the event. I'm going to have to do some finagling here, apparently. But we have to figure that out, like how am I going to get that information to this thing that it needs, right? In other words, the form data is now going to need to be an argument, user ID, and history. Okay. Something like that. And let's see, in order for this to happen now, I need to take the event and call handle submit with event form data user ID history. So now I'm using a little bit of just React, right? I'm passing a handler from a parent to a child. Handle submit is now coming in as a prop. I'm destructuring it. I'm passing it from here down to its child. And it's going to look one way inside of this, which is the new form. In other words, the form creation that we're already used to. And it's going to look different here, whoops, than it's going to in the edit form. And I've made a lot of breaking changes here, I think. So let's see what in the world, if there's any chance that we got this right on the first try. New form wrapper is going to receive, let's just double check from app. When app hits edit, I'm going to find my trip. I don't need to do this anymore. I'm not going to do it here anyway. And now I'm going to say new trip form wrapper. And I don't need edit mode anymore. I do need to pass my trip, and I do want all my props to come along. So my trip and my history props I need to pull. So for my new trip wrapper, I need my history and my trip. And that way I can pass them along. Now this is available. Oh, this one doesn't need the trip, does it? Wait, oh, I'm sorry. I did the wrong thing, didn't I? Apologize. I adjusted the wrong one. So let's go back to app. I adjusted this one, which is going to be edit trip form wrapper. So right now I'm just going to say trip form until we fix that. So this is the one, sorry, that I need to fix. This is now just going to be new trip form wrapper.
Typo 144, you have trip
Thank
form.
you. Trip form, cool. So this one actually, because it's a child of a route here, it's automatically going to get history. And the new trip form wrapper only needs history. It doesn't need a trip. These are all going to get passed back up from the child, all this information. I'm building the handle submit here. History is all I need. This might be good. And what in the world did we break? Okay, new form wrapper is not defined. That's because I need to import it. So I need to import both of those here. New trip form wrapper, new edit. Okay. Create trip is not defined on line 59 of trip form. Oh, yeah, I don't need any more here. Okay. Update trip form I do still need. And I have some kind of an error here. Oh, I didn't. A new trip form wrapper. So this is my return. Oh, this needs to be a full function with a return value. There we go. Maybe. Unexpected token on line 15. So let's see, we closed. Oops. It tried to auto close for me. It did auto close for me. Trip form is not defined. That's because I need to import it. Is everybody okay? Like the fact right now, what I'm doing, I knew I probably screwed some stuff up. And all I'm doing is I'm reading my errors one by one and knocking them out one by one. Let me know if I'm moving too fast or too slow. If you're like, what is he doing? What in the world is happening? Oh, I see I have a chat, sorry. Okay. No problem if anyone has to leave. Can't resolve components trip form. That's because I'm already in components. Okay, amazing. So let's just see if we are still able to connect with Redux. I want to see that the state is changing. So let's say I want to go to Australia. That seems to be working. Australia. Let's go in August of 2019. And let's be there for a little while and create this trip. All right. That was a problem, right? So we had a full page refresh there. Let's just see if that was created. It was not created. Bad things happened there. Let's see what the network says. Oh, that's interesting. So let's see what happened. Here's my handle submit. We should have passed our data. That was pretty interesting. Not exactly what I was expecting. Create trip. So let's just try to do that again. No, nothing. Trigger handle change. What is happening now? All right, so new trip to Australia. Starting then, go leaving then, and create trip. And nothing. Okay, so let's see what's going on here. I definitely want to know what is breaking, obviously. So let's see what happens if we break this up into a multi-line function. And oops, we can console log if we actually get here. And let's see if that fires or not. So back to Australia in July. Why not? We are there. Okay. Handle submit. Let's see if we get here. By the way, we could just prevent default here and not pass the event along. That's probably a little nicer anyway. Get rid of that and get rid of that as an argument. Okay. So let's see. Australia in July. We're in handle submit, and we seem to be causing a page refresh anyway. That's very interesting. So we hit our handle submit.
Howard, you're still sending the event in the call.
Thank you. And it shouldn't matter whether I do it there or there. Let's see. Did I spell it wrong? Handle submit, handle submit, handle submit. And I'm getting here, right? I'm getting here, so how would we not be? Actually, let's just see what's going on here. Let's keep it here. And handle submit. Event is, ooh. Okay. Is that the event? Definitely not. So what is, oh, I didn't save it. Okay, sorry. We should actually get the event. That was kind of silly. Let's try that again. Australia in July. Okay, that was the event. We saw it there. Why did it not prevent default? Oh, I didn't prevent default anymore. Dang it. I wonder if I misspelled prevent default. Is that possible? I'll have to go back and watch the video and see if that's what I did. Yep, I think I had to have misspelled prevent default. Okay, so now it still doesn't seem like we're firing create trip, and that's because why? What did we not do yet?
You need a dispatch?
I need my map dispatch to props, which is So I was actually invoking create trip, the action creator, which does virtually nothing. What I need is to invoke the connected version of, whoops, I was writing what I was saying, of create trip, okay, which is that one now. And then now that that's available as a prop, I can destructure it here and actually invoke the correct version of create trip, not just the measly little action creator, but the actual bulked up, reduxified version of create trip, which comes now through props, which I'm destructuring, which is why it still looks the same. And I invoke this thing now, and it should actually do big things like make network requests. And let's see what happens. And now I made a network request. I created a new trip, which I can now edit, and that's kind of like the whole point. But wait, now this is not right. And this is what we aim to fix. So it looks like, at a glance anyway, and let's just kind of double check all our bases. Let's look at Redux. It looks like we were able to add a trip. It looks like if I look at my, we even reset the new trip form. There's no way this would have fired if we didn't successfully create a trip. If I look at my trips, I can see that down here I have Australia with the start date and end date of this July. That all looks right. So I think that was successful. And we even, I don't know if you noticed, but we did go to the show page of that trip. So that seems like we got our new trip working. So we've slimmed down our trip form significantly. It's now expecting a handle submit to be passed to it. It no longer is connected to create trip. It now is only connected to form data history. It's getting history as a prop. It's still getting update trip form, which is Redux. The user ID and the trip, it's still getting. This is all feeling pretty good, I think. So now we're going to do something very similar to this. In fact, I'm just going to copy it and paste it into my edit form wrapper. And here's where things are a little bit different. And now I sort of accidentally almost, if I try and look at all this at once, and I don't know, I think we still can. Here's the one where I grabbed, and I started this last time, remember, I grabbed my trip, and I'm actually going to now grab edit trip form wrapper. Whoops, not edit trip form wrapper. And I'm going to pass my trip along, and then here's my edit trip form wrapper. First of all, I need to say edit trip form wrapper there. I'm no longer going to be creating trip. I'm now going to be updating a trip, which I don't think exists yet. I need to create this action. Well, I still need history. I now need update trip. I now need to grab update trip here too. I'm going to I'm going to close this so I don't accidentally overwrite the wrong thing. What did I, oh yeah, I changed that, okay. I need to import it, I already did. Okay, so I need my history, I need my update trip. My handle submit is now going to update the trip. And now it still needs the form data, it still needs the user ID, and it still needs history. So if I step back, what's the one thing that's missing here? Kind of like almost the whole point of why I'm splitting this up. Well, not the whole point. Why am I cleaning it up this way? What's that thing that we needed to do to the edit form that we didn't like doing before because it was violating React's little, like, let's not do side effect thingies during rendering?
Well, you're populating the fields.
Yes, so that's another thing I definitely want. So I think I called it set form data for edit. And so I'm going to connect to that as well. And a problem is though, like, when do I fire this thing? When do I fire set form data for edit?
When you do your change, well, when you do your click on your edit button.
Yeah. And so how can I make that happen right away when this thing, basically when this thing what? When it gets tagged into service, right? When it mounts, when it gets loaded. So what do I need to do with this particular component?
Component did mount.
I need to change it to a class so that I can use component did mount. So I'm going to sort of, I'm going to cut these and comment them for now because I need to remember that those are my props. Because I'm going to have to change the way that I reference all this stuff, right? This is now going to be a render, which then needs to be, well, this thing needs to be wrapped. I no longer say const. And I separate these. I now need to, these are the things I needed from props. So inside my handle submit, I'm going to say const. And actually, I need them both here. This is going to be update trip, sorry. I need them both here, so I'm just going to grab them and destructure them where I need them, which happens to be right here, equals the stop props. And I render. This doesn't change at all. So class extends React.component. Handle submit equals this whole thing. These arguments don't change. Oh, wait, I was passing history? Wait. I actually still have history. Ooh, I was kind of like double doing history because I'm passing it as an argument. I'm also grabbing it from props. I guess I can just get it passed back up. That's fine for now. So let's see, did we break anything there? Now what we need, as Sally mentioned, is I need a component to mount. And when it fires, then I need to say this.props.set form data for edit and pass in my this.props.trip. Let's see what I broke now. Set form data is not exported from actions my trips. It's not. Oh, should be actions. Oh, those are two different things, aren't they? From actions, this is trip form. Two different files. Update trip is not exported from actions my trip. Oh yeah, we didn't build this yet. So let's go to actions my trip. And we've got an add trip, we've got get trips, and we've got create trip. And update trip is going to be very similar to create trip. In fact, I am going to copy paste because a lot of this is going to be identical. And we'll close that up for now. This is going to be update trip. And it's still going to get the trip data and the history. It's still going to return dispatch. It's still going to build the object that I need for the backend to be palatable. I'm still going to send a fetch request, but it's now going to go somewhere else. So it's going to go to a particular trip, which means that right now I actually am missing a piece here, right? Because this is going to need to be tripdata.id or something like that. Tripdata.id. And this is going to be what kind of a request?
Patch.
A patch request. Content type is going to stay the same. Body is going to stay the same. I have my credentials include. I still want to grab the response. I still want to check for an error. I no longer want to add trip. I want to update trip. And this is going to be, I guess, like update trip success or something like that. This is what's actually going to update the store. This one's actually sending the fetch request, right? So there's kind of two actions in one going on here. I haven't built this one yet either. I still want to reset the trip form if this is successful. And I still want to go look at this thing that I've just changed. So a lot of this was reusable. I need to change these to be backticks. And I need to make sure that this trip data actually includes the trip ID. Let's see if we did that. Well, we haven't sort of built this functionality out yet. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself by even updating this. So we're going to put this one, we're going to kind of make an assumption, I think that's fair, that trip data also needs an ID along with it. So just for good measure, I'm going to duplicate this guy. And this is now going to be update trip success. So in other words, we've gotten that trip back. It's going to still be a trip. This is going to be update trip. And I definitely am going to need to somehow like come in here. This is the trip with all its new data. And I need to go to my trips reducer and update the reducer as well for my trips. And it's going to be add trip. So we'll just duplicate this. This is going to be update trip. And this is going to be something totally different. For now, let's just return state, knowing that I will console log the action as well. Right, so I'm just kind of setting these up so that I can actually start debugging this without errors. So I've updated my reducer to have an update trip case. I've updated my trips for an update trip success and an update trip action to be exported. Don't know if they work yet, but we will find out soon enough. But at least, you know, those are breaking changes that I can't even sort of debug this thing unless I have those set up. And when I go to my edit, I'm going to find my trip. I'm going to pass that trip down to my edit form wrapper, which, so I wasn't actually grabbing it yet. So I need to then make sure I grab that thing here, trip. And I really just need the trip ID, but I'll just grab the trip here and then pass along. So form data, and then I'm going to include within the form data not just the user ID, but the trip ID. And that's going to be trip.id, and then the user ID as well. So that should actually take care of, in my action creator, action creator for my trips, the ID that I'm expecting. I'm sorry, I keep choosing the wrong one there. For update trips, which is here. Trip data is where I included that ID. So trip data.id now exists. And is that what I called it? Trip ID? I called it trip ID. Okay, let's do that. Trip ID. Okay, just trying to connect these pieces here. So now this first argument here, this object that I've highlighted corresponds to trip data. And I'm using it to not just build the request to send to the backend, but I'm also sending it to the right place. Okay. So let's see what we've broken now. Handle submit is not defined. Unexpected use of history. Oh, this is fun. Okay, so in my edit trip form wrapper on line 25, I'm doing all sorts of terrible things. Let's figure out what they are. Okay, of course. So there is no history defined here. And unfortunately, like at the top of, because this is now a class component, I can't just reference these things like this unless I pull them from where they came from, which happens to be props. So I could say const, once again, const history and handle submit equals the stop props. And I forgot my curly brackets. So let's see what we broke now. What? Nothing? Get out of here. Okay. There's no way this, okay, so the first step is to see if our patch request works, right? Are we actually going to be able to send this trip? So instead of 2019, you know what? I can't go to Australia this year. I'm going to go next year. So instead of 2019, we're going to 2020. And as we watch, update new trip form. Ooh, I should change the name of that action because it's really just update trip form. But for now, it's working because it, you know, it doesn't care. It doesn't care that it's called one thing and it really should be called something else. So update the trip form. This is actually the edit trip form. Let's see what happens when I click create. And I want to watch my network tab. Oh, wow. Terrible, terrible things happen. Wow, I have no idea. I don't even know what just happened. That was a lot. We just got sent for some somersaulting there. So let's see, line 19, trip, blah, 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 actions, trip form, line 19, trip.attributes.name. Okay. So a lot of terrible things happen there. Wow, that was rough. Let's check and see something it didn't like. What didn't it like? That's in const trip form data. This is, where are we here? Trip form on line 19. Line 19. So this is in set form data for edit. So basically, when we fired off, not this one actually. This That's interesting. So this actually came from set form data for edit, which should have already happened well before we hit that submit. So let's kind of go back. Let's see what's going on. It does not, okay, so right now it's not liking this at all. So cannot read property attributes of undefined. So let's just see, where did we fire that? We fire that on component did mount of edit form wrapper. And so let's just do this.props.trip. And so it looks like the trip was undefined there at some point. So if we, now it's not rendering what we want. Okay, that's fine. Okay, so if I go to my trips and I go to this thing and I try to edit this trip, that seems to work. If I go back to new trip, it's not cleared, which is another issue that we need to handle. But if I go back to my trips, oh yeah, we went to the Grand Canyon, I go to edit this trip. This seems to be working okay right now. By the way, I really do want to pass along to my trip form. Now I want to say something like edit mode, because I do need to use this. I can only do so much within the wrapper. So if I pass down edit mode, and I'm going to go ahead and grab that edit mode as a prop in trip form, and that's what I'm going to use to either say create trip or update trip. So I can say edit mode, create trip, otherwise update trip. Oops, that's a string. Okay, cool. So now it should say update trip. And I don't like, so what's happening here is does anyone know what's happening right now? Unfortunately, this is not a problem that I would expect to happen with a user. What's happening is because this is the URL that's loading, when the wrapper loads, it's on that initial load and the trip isn't there. And so, but as soon as I actually get there, once I'm mounted, and we're no longer at add init, for example, and I go to edit this trip, that information's there. And so what I'm pointing out is, if we refresh the page and this wrapper loads, it only mounts one time. And that first mount on add init, this thing's empty, there is no trip, right? It's getting everything going. It's not there yet. So this thing fails to actually fire anything off. I don't expect that anyone's actually going to go to www.trips.my.domain/trips/1/edit. It's a problem that I would like to fix, but it's not one that really worries me right now. And so what does worry me is that I don't see create trip here. That does worry me. Did we not grab edit mode? We should have as a prop. Did we pass it as a prop? Yes. Do we have it as a prop? That worries me. Trip form edit mode is true. Why do we see create trip then?
Is that ternary operator backwards?
Probably.
Am I reading that correctly?
We sure are. Thank you. Sometimes it's the little things. Cool. Awesome. So let's see. So now when we go to my trips, hey, like 15 minutes?
Did you want a message?
No?
You want to go out?
Yes. Sorry, I'm talking to my wife here. You can come say hi if you want. So now let's see what happens when we update this trip. Let's go to July. And terrible things are happening now as well. Let's see if we sent a request to the back end. We did not. We sent a GET request. Oh, this isn't good. Okay. So we still have some cleanup work to do. Unfortunately, we're out of time for this session. Does anyone have any questions about what we're trying to accomplish or kind of the methodology that we're aiming toward right now? Any thoughts before we hang up? Well, there's the last two standing.
So Howard, your two wrappers are just basically taking your trip form and taking the specific function out of trip form so you can still use the same form but for two different purposes and
right.
accessing the store.
Exactly. And this and I'm telling them to like handle updates to the store that need to happen like before the trip form renders so we don't violate that whole let's change things while we render, right, policy. And then it also cleans up the form quite a bit, right? I've removed the logic out of my handlers, I should say out of my submit handler. And the only, like right now, I only have one ternary in this entire thing, which is edit mode. Whereas if I was trying to use the same form for edit and create, and I tried to just cram everything in, I turn it into a class component, I give it its own component did mount cycle, then I'm gonna have ternaries everywhere. Are we in edit mode? Then we're gonna, so this would be like on submit, edit mode, then handle create, not edit mode, then handle update, you know, things like that. And this thing just becomes really, in my opinion, a little bit uglier than if we just wrap it and we let those wrapping handlers, the wrapping components handle that kind of logic. Does that make sense?
It does. It's a lot of stuff, but it does.
It is a lot of stuff. It is a lot of stuff. There's no question about it. And I'd love to chase this down. I was hoping to get this kind of finished up with this session. We will obviously need one more to make it happen. But I think we're getting really close. And if I go to my trips, we went to the Grand Canyon, I can see this thing. And now I just need to figure out what is happening. Why are we not getting to where we need to? I think it just has to do with making sure that our update trip action creator is actually doing what it should do. And right now it apparently isn't because it's not working. But we'll get there. So we're still breaking things here, but this is going to be something that'll be fun to hunt down and finish up on our next session.
All right, so when you have a chance, post your code.
You bet. I will do that. And I wish you all a very, very happy 4th of July weekend.
Yep.
And I'm going to stop the recording.
Have a great